everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is my very first time in Norway, and everyone's been super welcoming to me, so thank you so much for your hospitality. My name is McPherson. I'm head of Green Economy and Sustainable Growth at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, or IIPP. And what we do at the Institute is we try to rethink public value and change it in a new way. We try to reimagine it to how it's practiced, how it's evaluated, and what kind of frameworks sit around value, and how we can use this concept of value to actually rethink big societal challenges, so global heating, sustainable cities. And today I'm going to talk you through some of our work with towns and cities in practice and in theory on the green transition. But firstly, I wonder if any of you ever have a sense of déjà vu as you walk to work. You're going down the same routes every day. Do the same thoughts come into your mind? They definitely do for me. And my daily sense of déjà vu happens as I walk out of Euston Station in North London, down to the UCL campus in Bloomsbury. And as I walk past Euston Road about 8:30 a.m. in the morning, as well as thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch, I can't help but bring into my mind the fact that Euston Road is one of the most polluted spots in the whole of London and in the whole of the UK. There are 95 micrograms of nitrogen dioxide per cubic meter in the air at Euston Road. And this is something, it's an idea that I can't shift, and sitting underneath it, I can't shift questions around the economic and social kind of networks that lead to Euston Road being so polluted. The reason that Euston Road is so polluted is that it sits right on top of the London congestion charge zone, or the new ultra-low emission zone that was put in just a few weeks ago. And the ultra-low emission zone has set new standards for cars and vans going into central London. So if you have a car or a van and it goes above the emission standards, you're paying £12.50 to go into London on a weekday. If you have a lorry or a bus, you're paying £100 for the privilege. And this just starts me thinking about what it actually means to live the green, good life in a city, and how everyone should be able to do so, because some people are going to be less economically well off by that emissions zone. Some people aren't going to be able to just change their mode of transport at the drop of a hat. So it starts me thinking, how can we have it all? How can we have a just transition that is fair, that includes everyone, and that gives everyone the opportunity to flourish within the 21st century? And we know the idea of the good life from history. We know in the 1950s, the good life was suburbia. It was having your own washing machine, your own dishwasher, having electricity and water, having a white picket fence, and those kinds of things. But what is the green good life today? What is the feminist green good life? What is the intersectional green good life for people who live and work in cities? And I'm very much stealing this idea of the good life from an economist called Carlota Perez, who works with us a lot at the Institute, and who's historically done a lot of work around innovation and technological revolutions, and how each developing technological revolution leads to a huge kind of upswell in living standards. So she's gone across the decades, she's looked at steam, rail, canals, even suburbia brought about by mass production, by the innovation of mass production. And every time you can track this kind of golden age coming up after the technological revolution. And I'm kind of thinking, what does this mean for what's the golden age of the green good life? What is the revolution, the innovation that we have to harness to get there? Is it information technology? Is it kind of social media and communications and connectivity? Because we know what the brown bad life looks like. We know kind of what uninspiring city dwelling looks like. We know it's kind of high asthma rates in kids living on ground floors. We know that these lead to second order effects like obesity and even things like crime rates. So we need to kind of get people moving towards this greener, good way of life, not because of fear of things like the climate crisis and global heating, or even desire to protect the economic system we currently have, which, let's face it, has positives and negatives. We need to get a move towards the green good life because it's too wonderful not to want to go there. As Carlota Perez would say, the green good life needs to be so beautiful that we can all get behind it, even if, and this is the big if, we don't know what it looks like yet. It's just a vision. We can see kind of different aspects of how it could be better to be more green, have a less polluted world, but we don't know the whole of it just yet. So I would argue that actually to get to the green good life, we need innovation, we need investment, we need imagination, and we actually need to also increase the interactions that we have between different parts of our economy, just as we were talking about earlier. And I would argue too that we need a kind of new heterodox economic understanding of these questions of value, of how public value is created in public spaces like the city, how it's developed, how it's safeguarded, and who gets to partake in it, who gets to be economically valuable. So as so often, and you'll do this all the time at business school, we need to rethink our economics 101. The kind of dominant economic framework today suggests that only things that are valuable and that can be exchanged, that's where value is restricted. Whatever can be exchangeable with a price for a market value, that can have that value found by the supply and the demand curve. And when you come to think about the elements that might make up the green good life, these things in particular aren't found, they don't have a value in that same way. So things like air pollution, water quality, these aren't valued in a way that adds up, or they are increasingly being quantified, but they're not being valued in areas like GDP. Thinking further afield about the more inclusive good life, things like social care, household work that's often carried out by women doesn't feed into GDP. Instead, some of these issues are seen as market failures. They're classed as negative externalities for the government to deal with. And actually, this is what Euston Road really is. It's a government-led response to a negative externality of air pollution. So policymakers in the public sector, that's for them to deal with, and not for businesses necessarily to take up. And this kind of leads into a question of how do you interrogate what is valued in a society? And the Institute founder and director, Professor Mariana Mazzucato, has written a book recently you might have come across, which kind of does what it says on the tin. It tries to get into the value of everything and interrogate these questions of what is valued, what isn't valued, what sits within a productive production boundary and what doesn't, and how we need to shift this. And at IIPP, what we really say is that this idea that the market comes out of the supply and demand curve and that it's this static place where you just buy or you sell, this isn't really what the market is. Instead, the market should be an outcome. It should be built by lots of different actors working together, people from the private sector, people from the public sector, people from the third sector, and it should reflect the decision made by multiple people, multiple organizations, to move in a specific direction, and that could be the green direction. And it should really reflect and encourage symbiotic, fruitful partnerships between these different actors, instead of kind of putting them into opposition with one relegated to negative externalities and one on the value creation side. And specifically, this does mean, and I won't dwell on it too long because it's a piece of work we do talk about quite a lot, this means a dynamic reconsideration of the role of the public sector alongside other actors. I mean, public organizations and the sector in the local economy are a really valuable asset to city change. Often they're the only people that really understand how citizens live intimately within the local economy. But at the moment, they're kind of working on small, discrete policy changes, fixing the market and then getting out of the way so that the private sector can do exciting, entrepreneurial, innovative stuff. And this kind of reflects a misguided approach, historically speaking. We kind of need to dislodge this narrative that the private sector is the fun, entrepreneurial, innovative one, and that takes all the risks and gets behind these new innovative initiatives. Because the public sector has so often been the investor of first resort rather than the lender of last resort. Public organizations have often been risk-taking and created enormous spillovers, not just within their own sector, but to the consumer space. And this is a really good example. A lot of the pioneering technology you see in your iPhone, and other smartphones are available, but in your iPhone, comes from original research that's been financed by various government agencies. And you can see here things like Siri, things like your touchscreen. These all came out of initial government-funded projects, a lot of them in the US. The touchscreen was originally funded from a grant by the CIA. So at IIPP, what we're constantly doing is trying to think about new tools and new approaches to getting away from a kind of market fixing, market failure approach, and towards this idea of markets as outcomes, markets that are shaped and co-created by lots of different actors. So we're kind of always bringing in experts from across different industries, from housing, from welfare, people like labor unions who often don't have a voice at this kind of table, to test and interrogate different approaches to what we call market shaping. There's loads of questions that come out of this. How should a shaped market be governed? How should it be managed? How can you make it directed, but still a real experimental testbed? And how can you move from just leveling the playing field and letting everyone kind of play at the same level to actively tilting in a green direction to get green innovation going? And one of the key lenses that I'm going to talk about for the rest of the presentation that we use to kind of come to a market shaping approach is called mission-oriented innovation. And we have a big mission-oriented innovation network made up of people from the public and private sector who are trying to think about these things in new ways. And that's often innovation agencies, it's government departments, it's investment banks, because we obviously need finance to be more mission-oriented too. So I think everyone can kind of understand what a mission is. If you were to talk to your neighbor for kind of 10 seconds and ask them what their mission was, their mission in life, or even their company mission, it's a really easy, intuitive thing to understand. But how does this apply to economics, or to industrial strategy, or to innovation policy? Well, mainly it applies in the difference to how things have been done before. So traditionally, in industrial strategy, investment is made kind of vertically, across different sectors. So the automobile sector or the aerospace sector, because you're thinking that these sectors will drive the whole economy forward. Or investment is made horizontally. You identify a training or a skills gap that can be invested in again to support the whole economy. But missions are different. Missions take big societal challenges like climate change or healthy aging or data and AI, and they create a mission to tackle that challenge. And in doing so, they just go a bit bolder and a bit bigger, and they create a safe, political, and encouraging economic framework around this problem. So instead of picking sectors, what we say is that missions pick problems. And one of the examples that we often talk about historically, there's a lot of historical examples of missions, but one of them is the Apollo moon mission. And this took place, of course, over the course of the 60s. And between 1962, with the speech, Kennedy's speech at Rice Stadium in Texas, saying we choose to go to the moon this decade, that's what we choose to do, and the 1969 return of the astronauts from the moon, there were hundreds of thousands of homework problems that were set across multiple different sectors and that had to be solved. So a really obvious sector is aerospace, but a less kind of high-tech sector would be textiles. So what are people going to wear on the moon? We don't know. We have to innovate, and we have to innovate fast. People can't eat a hamburger on the moon, so we have to involve the nutrition sector as well and think about how that can work. So we're kind of also still reaping the reward in many senses of the spillovers that came out of lunar innovation, of the investment from companies like, from public sector organizations like NASA, in the same way that we're still reaping as consumers the innovation benefits that you've seen in the iPhone earlier. But today's problems are kind of very different to the one that NASA faced in the 60s. Well, NASA's problem was mainly a technical feat. It was a very important one, but it was mainly about technological change and capabilities. Today, the wicked problems that we face, the super wicked problems, are about mass behavioral change. They require social change. They require social sciences to work alongside technology, much in the way that Carlota Perez's work outlines. There's more complexity needed both in the questions and in the solutions to the missions in the 21st century. And up here you can see we've kind of, through our work, come to 5 criteria that we think every mission needs to have in order to try and be successful. So firstly, it needs to be directed. It needs to have a real clear direction so that civil society can get behind it, can believe in it, and can make things work and want to be employed to work in this mission. Secondly, it needs to have a concrete target. Like with a man getting to the moon and back, you know when you've hit that. It needs to be ambitious, but also realistic. It needs to be a kind of big, hairy, audacious goal, but also it needs to be something that you can actually think you can achieve so that you don't disappoint people in the long run. It needs to be multi-sectoral. We've already talked about kind of how that works. And it needs to involve lots of competing bottom-up solutions. You've got to let 1,000 flowers bloom, but understand that some of those solutions will fail. A lot of them might just not work. That's how innovation works. And people kind of working on those different innovation and mission projects need to understand that failure is something to learn from. On the other hand, some areas might surprise you. Interactions between sectors that you didn't think would be particularly fruitful might come out with innovations that you didn't expect. So how do you take this mission-oriented innovation kind of idea and concept and make it into a framework to use in cities, to use in towns, and to orient towards the green good life? Well, we've started doing this at IIPP at national, local, and supranational level. This is an example of the kind of roadmap that we've got to for how mission-oriented frameworks can be developed. And this is an example of work we've done with the European Commission on the new research and innovation program. And this mission-oriented innovation roadmap has the really bold goal of 100 carbon-neutral cities by 2030. And you can see here how this actually does need to bring in multiple different sectors. It's about real estate, it's about construction, but it's also about food and mobility, and about social sciences and more kind of softer approaches. It's incredibly ambitious. It's very kind of hypothetical as well, because it's just to show, this is not, happening right now, but it's to show how the mission roadmap works and how it can change thinking, how it can change the thinking about how research and innovation happens, how the investment around that happens at European Commission level. And we've applied this as well at a very much more hands-on and practical kind of level. This is the mission roadmap. It follows the exact same pattern of challenge, mission, sectors, and projects, which intersect with one another. This is the one for Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester in the north of England, they have a mayoral challenge to become carbon neutral by 2038. And within the UK, that's 12 years earlier than the rest of the UK, at 2050. And when the mayor, Andy Burnham, announced this in 2018, this was 20 years away. It's a very worthy, big, and exciting goal, but how do you make a plan of action to tackle it? Well, what we did is we worked very closely with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and we took a lot of their data, a lot of their background understanding of how the city region works and interacts, and we translated this into a mission with a populated roadmap. We dug into data around their innovation strengths, around where innovation was weaker, around which organizations and companies and sectors were more or less resilient, how high and low carbon sectors were doing in terms of areas like abatement, where were the kind of easy areas to win, and where were the longer term plays. And one thing that's really important about missions is that we didn't pick, the big financially successful companies, the winning companies, the winners. Instead, we looked for the most willing, the people and the companies that were up for being ambitious on climate change, even if they weren't necessarily there yet. But they really wanted to get behind this mission. Obviously, energy, environment, and natural capital, transport, these kinds of areas, they're obvious candidates to draw on. But actually, we also had a really good time looking at the more idiosyncratic and the unique sectors in Manchester. Manchester is the northern home of the BBC and ITV at Media City. It's developing its own local energy market, and you might have come across its sports economy, which is very unique. So we came to 6 hyper-local projects, which are naturally kind of cross-sector and have built-in spillover opportunities. These are things like circular economy, developing a local circular economy, and things like drainage, which bring together, it's not the most exciting of topics, but drainage can very easily bring together waste, water, natural capital, and forestry, if you're looking at drainage through planting trees. So we kind of brought all of these things together, but the mission that we kind of got to, oh, hang on, I'll stick on this one. The mission that we got to was not just about having a carbon neutral city region. What it was about is having every single citizen in Greater Manchester, all their activities at home, in transit, during leisure time, when on one of Manchester's many buses or trams, having all of their activities absolutely characterized by carbon neutrality with an underpinning behavioral change and carbon literacy approach in schools and in all workplaces. So the carbon neutral dream becomes trackable and visible. All citizens can get behind it and trace it. And what this leads to is a really exciting sense of mission mystique, what we call mission mystique. People want to come and work for the team that's working on this mission. Something like Goldman Sachs or the job offer that you got from Google becomes the second best job offer on the table if you could otherwise go and work for a big mission. And that's what we really want people to feel. So mission-oriented innovation has been popular in cities and beyond. We're working at national level with the industrial strategy team in the UK, with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And they have at the moment a challenge-oriented industrial strategy, which was developed a couple of years ago. And the 4 big challenges are clean growth, mobility, AI and data, and healthy aging. And at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, we have been running a commission to help guide and shape how mission-oriented approaches can tackle these big challenges. And just yesterday, we launched our first-year commission report with 11 key recommendations of how anyone can do industrial strategy or local industrial policy that has this mission-oriented approach. So please download it or have a look at it, and I've got some copies if you would like one. And also then, we've been working in the financial world. I mean, the climate crisis needs long-term patient finance. It also needs urgent finance, but it needs both types of finance. So we're working to get to mission-oriented innovation and approaches for financial organizations. And we've been working with public investment banks, national promotional banks, to get them thinking about how their lending can be more directed. And the Scottish National Investment Bank is a really interesting case in point, where we've been helping them. They're launching in 2020, it's a very new bank, and they're developing a mission-oriented approach to their lending with conditionality attached to that. And lastly, we've been working with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals team, And these are already tangible challenges, 17 tangible challenges that are really well aligned with this mission-oriented approach to achieve them. So just to finish quickly, who is it that gets to set missions? Well, we all get to set missions. The public gets to set missions. The idea of mission mystique and the idea of wanting to work for a mission has to be led by us. So why not pick the green good life to be the mission for your organization or for your town or city, and work out what it looks like, what the green good life vision is as you're on your way there. Thank you very much.